It is time for a chat with Pat.
Yeah. So today, forgive me, this kind of snuck up on me. I usually am at the end of the week somewhere doing one of these, but all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I think I'm supposed to do something today.
By popular demand, it's a chat with Pat, yeah.
So anyway, a couple of weeks ago, at the end of the day, I was kind of tired, and so I just kind of started flipping through the TV channels. I just wanted something kind of mindless that I didn't have to think a lot about, because we were, at the end of the semester, and I was, all glued and cued into that. So I started flipping through, and there wasn't really much to watch. And so then I went to one of my free apps, because I refused to pay for apps. So I went to one of my free apps and just clicking again around. And there was a show that kind of sounded interesting. And I came across it. It was called Living Biblically. It was a 30-minute comedy. So it's a situation comedy. So I thought, well, I'll just watch the first one, right? And the premise of the show was interesting. The premise of the show is that you've got this young guy who's married. His wife is, I think she's a nurse or a PA. And he and his best friend ends up dying. You don't really know how, but it really shakes him up. And so he kind of spirals into this depression, right? Where like he's just sitting around the house in his bathrobe eating food. And his wife comes home from work one day and tells him that she's pregnant. So they're pregnant with their first child. And he realizes that with being a dad, he wants to become the best father that he can be, right? And so he realizes, he thinks about his friend's life, and he realizes they weren't living the way they should live. It wasn't maybe a good life. So he turns to a priest. And the priest is friends with a rabbi. So they kind of become his God squad, the two of them. And they hang out kind of at the local bar every now and then and chat about the faith and those kinds of things. But that's kind of the backstory. And there are quirky characters in it. But what really kind of caught my eye in the whole thing was here was a person who was really trying to live by the Bible, and how hard it was for him. But it was also hard for the people around him. They didn't want him to change. And even his wife, she was a non-believer. She was all science, His friends at work were not believers. But yet he keeps reading the Bible, keeps trying to do the right thing. They have a show on stealing and a show on lying and a show on adultery and so there's all these things from the Bible that they pull into the show and how to deal with them. And so Sunday night, again, tired, just flipped on and watched the last show. There was only one season of this show. So it dealt with all these topics. But it was very interesting to me because I thought, it dealt with prayer, it dealt with worship, all that. And of course, pride. But I kind of thought about how is the spirit of the age at odds with our faith? Because that's really kind of was at the heart of this show. Often we don't see the spirit of the age because we're just doing what the culture says is okay. And we don't challenge ourselves to think about it differently. And so that was the interesting piece of this show, that he kept challenging himself to see things differently. How to love his neighbor that plays music really loud, or how to, what does that really mean? How do you lovingly challenge a friend who is committing adultery? All of this was wrapped up in this show, and people didn't want to change. But yet there was a hunger for this. He was a newspaper writer, and his boss, who again is a non-believer, says, hey, there's an interest in this. Why don't you write about it? And so he started writing about it, and it became a really popular column. So it's like you sense there's a hunger out there for it, but yet nobody really wanted to change their life. Nobody really wanted to tell the truth. Nobody really, I mean, it was very, very interesting. So this spirit of the age thing. So I thought, okay, what can I kind of look at that would kind of link in with this show? And one of my favorite writers is Anthony Esolen. He's a prolific Catholic writer. And he wrote an article called Verses for Our Time. And this is where he rewrites scripture passages in the sense of the spirit of the age. This is what the world says. And when you know the Bible, you understand, yep, this isn't the Lord saying this. I just want to give you a couple of these, how he rewrote them to kind of challenge us a little bit. It is good for man to be alone, said the spirit of the age. I will take his helpmate from him and set her up by herself. So he cast the man into a deep sleep and took the woman apart, instructing her in the ways things ought to be, so that when the man awoke, he would find himself alone and unnecessary. I mean, just think about that. And when he talks about the spirit of the age, he's talking about these messages we are getting from our world, in our culture. Sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. Another one, then Jesus and his disciples came to the coasts of Judea beyond the Jordan, and no one brought to him any little children, because there were none to bring. Ooh. Think about that. This is the sense, we're talking about abortion, we're talking about birth dearth, we're talking about all these things. This is exactly the impact when we turn away from biblical living. And of course, and these three things remain: self-confidence, ambition, and malice. And the greatest of these is malice. Think about that. What are we seeing around us? What is the world telling us? And again, he says, the spirit of the age says, every man can serve two masters, loving each of them in his own way, for God and mammon are one. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That the world tells us that money is our God. So they're one. So you can love two masters, right? And this is the way the spirit of the age twists things to make things that are harmful to us look good. And the last one in his article really touched me. It was, in the beginning was the noise. In the beginning was the noise, right? Noise, chaotic, lots of voices instead of the word. The word, in the beginning was the word, right? The idea that there is one word that speaks to our hearts. And so this idea of being torn between the spirit of the age and trying to live as the Lord asks us to live, I think is very clear. So
I love it, Pat, and quite frankly, it's very clear in my life where you really have to identify those times when you've followed the spirit of the age and you've allowed a false teaching to come in, and you've got to get rid of it, which is why the scripture says test every spirit, because we're susceptible.
That's why the nightly examine is such a good idea, because you can review your day and say, I kind of walked off the path there, didn't I?
Yeah, exactly. And just becoming aware of the spirit of the age, to me, is a big step in the right direction, because I don't think a lot of people are even aware of that. They just think, I'm just living my life trying to be good, and they don't understand what influences them, what messages they're getting, because sometimes they're so subtle.
I like to send you notes when you've had a guest on that I really like. Well, today you had a guest on I really like.